What if I told you that when Americans celebrate the 4th of July, that they are involved in a ritual rooted in the worship of the pagan god Baal? If you still think the date of the 4th of July has no esoteric or spiritual connections by the time you are finished this video, then I'm afraid you're not looking deeply enough. America is a republic, and like all republics, it is based upon the rites and rituals and ceremonies of ancient pagan Rome. This is why you have neoclassical architecture. This is why you have the likes of George Washington and the other founding fathers of America acting like ancient Roman emperors and governors and giving their slaves names such as Flavius and Cassius. Before we get to this, we first have to understand the mystical and magical relationship between human spiritual magical traditions and the act of fire and fire making. The creation of fire was the first act of magic undertaken by human beings which did not originate from biological or reproductive means. Therefore, it would only be natural that fire and the veneration of the burning flame would become a central part of the human magical and spiritual tradition. The rubbing of two sticks together had a very powerful male and female aspect in the creation or generation of the birthed flame. The Celtic cross, for example, represents two sticks being rubbed together, and at the center of it hangs the light of the world, which Christian tradition would later adopt for their own needs. The pagan Persians were so consumed with the veneration of fire that on certain festivals they would create a firebox without a chimney, which would be fed perfumes and incense in order to signify the presence or arrival of an auspicious person or celebration. When a powerful king or ruler died, it was customary to extinguish all the fires of the land of Persia, so the entire country would remain in darkness until the new king was crowned. Among the Tatar people of Eurasia and Siberia, strangers would be made to undergo a spiritual cleansing by passing between two fires before entering into the community. This twin flame purification ritual, which later made its way into Freemasonry as the two columns of Yakum and Boaz, existed for the purpose of burning off bad spirits, became a universal idea. In fact, the two columns outside many neoclassical buildings represent this idea of the flaming threshold that keeps out bad spirits or evil, the sanctity of the threshold upon entering into the domain of the building. The Tatars derived this from earlier Shamanic Siberian traditions, who came to see a burning flame as an actual entity with its own personality, which existed from one fire to another. These fire spirits were considered either good or bad in their personal nature, and hence the idea of sacrifice by fire in order to appease the god residing in the flames. One of humanity's earliest rituals is that of trial by fire. Within the Vedas of India, individuals accused of wrongdoings were expected to prove their guilt or innocence by walking over a path of hot coals or red-hot iron ore. Within the ancient Celtic cultures of Anatolia, the goddess Diana Parasaya was said to stand atop an eternal carpet of red-hot coals in order to demonstrate her purity and power. This enduring legacy of ancient supernatural rites surrounding that of fire and flame can be found in the Baal fire of St. John's Eve, an ancient pagan festival still observed in parts of Celtic England and the northwest of Ireland. The veneration of Baal within the British Isles is almost certainly rooted in Roman influence. While the Hebrew Old Testament places the veneration of the pagan god Baal as a deeply forbidden rite, As late as the early 20th century in Northumberland, on the border area between England and Scotland, on the frontier of what was once the Roman Empire, Baal fires were traditionally lit on St. John's Eve, as it came to be later known, and in the village of Walton the locals would jump over the flames of a ceremonial fire, unknowingly worshipping the god Baal. The date of this was July 4th. Leading up to the event, large quantities of firewood would be collected. This would then be brought to the village from surrounding farms and stockpiled with great ceremony. On the night of the 4th of July, a cart full of kindling would have been brought to the main bonfire, surrounded by the dancing, musical instruments and people cheering. The community would be celebrating itself, its integration, its culture, its nature, and what its values were during the building of this ceremonial Baal fire. Before the fire was lit, children would then join hands and dance around the fire until they became tired. Finally, a master of ceremonies gave the order to light the fire, and the fire of Baal would be lit, lighting up the entire village and surrounding it with illumination designed to solidify the souls of all present in the village. This Balfire ritual, when one considered it was a custom within Celtic parts of Britain and Ireland, naturally bears an uncanny resemblance to the Beltane pagan customs of the Celtic people of Europe. As the etymology is so strikingly similar, it is worth speculating that our term Beltane, which is also the name of the month of May in the Irish language, is perhaps of a Roman influence within Celtic Europe, to rephrase a festival of a much older proto-shamanic origin. Such amalgamations of Roman and Celtic deities and cross-veneration is hardly unusual, as gods such as Vulcan and Minerva straddled that grey area between Roman and Celtic worship that at times leads to a fusion of rites and rituals common to both traditions. Now, how did this worship of the god Baal make its way to the United States? Well, it's very similar to how Halloween or Samhain made its way to the United States by means of emigrants from the Celtic countries, and in this case, Scotland. In Perthshire in Scotland, this amalgamation of Baal and the earlier Beltane ceremonial fire rituals of the Celtic peoples existed in a now sadly lost custom of the Balfire festival on St. John's Eve, again July 4th, then connected to the Celtic ceremonial fire date of Beltane on May 1st. We also have Walpurgis night in the Germanic tradition, which is April 30th, the night before, again a fire ritual. Within Perthshire, in certain remote areas, a peculiar ritual took place whereby young men of a region would build a circular fire and then upon it bake a cake of sweetened custard and oatmeal upon a ceremonial stone. The cake would then be divided into equal pieces to the number of youths in the congregation. One of the pieces would be covered in charcoal ash from the Baal fire. Each young man then had to select a piece of cake from the pile while he was blindfolded. The one who did so was then ritually sacrificed to the fire of Baal. This meant that for the following year he was to be the servant of the community and do chores and perform work for others in the community for free, as a means of solidifying the identity of the community as an association or a fraternity designed to entrench the identity of the community itself. In other words, sacrifice themselves to the group, a form of patriotism. The baking of this custard cake was once common all around Celtic Britain and Ireland, and at Beltane until about 100 years ago it was formed into the shape of a man or an animal. This is almost certainly an effigy of an ancient god, which by then the actual name of had been lost. Although it's not unfeasible to suggest that this god may well have been Baal himself, having been brought to the British Isles by the Romans. While the Celtic pagan holiday of May 1st Beltane and the Semitic Baal fire of July the 4th originated thousands of miles apart, it was during pagan Roman Empire that the two festivals became mingled and symbolically fused the dates of veneration into the original proto-shamanic origins of a far more ancient past, going back to the times of the Bronze Age and the megalithic builders. One of the reasons these customs died out in the late 1700s and early 1800s within Britain and Ireland is to do with emigration. Many rural communities of Ireland, Scotland, Ulster and the north of England simply emigrated to the United States and, like Samhain or Halloween, simply brought the festivals to America, and they were lost in their homeland. In time, the Baal fire became the 4th of July fireworks, same date, same traditions. And in the USA today, being directly connected to this ancient Baal veneration, so are the fireworks and bonfires which are lit all over that country on July 4th, or the date of Baal. Why did this become officially enshrined within mainstream American society? Quite simply, for the same reason it existed in the towns and villages of Scotland. It fused the community together. It created a sense of sacrifice to the whole. It brought people together. In terms of patriotism and community service, your identity was fused under the blazing fires and fireworks of the July 4th Baal fire, while you consumed foods that made you feel good and bonded you with your fellow citizens. We all know that the United States was a byproduct of Scottish Rite Freemasonry as much as that of French Republicanism, which also was a product of the pagan Roman Empire. So next 4th of July, remember that you're celebrating an ancient god called Baal and also other ancient European and Semitic fire gods.